Welcome back. You're watching Left, Right and Centre. A key statement by Foreign Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar on China in Parliament, very carefully calibrated. He speaks about the disengagement process but points out that there is some improvement in ties, but a lot more needs to be done. Earlier in the day, I spoke to Harsh Shringla, who was Foreign Secretary at the time when the Galwan incident happened, and he was Foreign Secretary for a long time afterwards as well. He speaks, and this is an interesting interview, an interesting conversation on the tension that existed there and just how close both sides may have been to a larger border conflict.
The House is aware that our ties have been abnormal since 2020, when peace and tranquility in the border areas were disturbed as a result of Chinese actions. Recent developments that reflect our continuous diplomatic engagement since then have set our ties in the direction of some improvement. The House is cognizant of the fact that China is an illegal occupation of 38,000 square kilometers of Indian territory in Aksai Chin as a result of the 1962 conflicts and the event that preceded it. Furthermore, Pakistan illegally ceded 5,180 square kilometers of Indian territory to China in 1963, which has been under its occupation since 1948. India and China have held talks for multiple decades to resolve the boundary issue. While there is a line of actual control, LAC, it does not have a common understanding in some areas. We remain committed to engaging with China through bilateral discussions to arrive at a fair, reasonable, and mutually acceptable framework for a boundary settlement.
Now, a very special guest to look at the statement of the External Affairs Minister in Parliament. Harsh Shringla, India's G20 Sherpa, was a Foreign Secretary at the time when Galwan took place. He was approximately 5 months into being the Foreign Secretary of India, and he was Foreign Secretary through some of the most difficult and challenging times that we perhaps ever had with China since the 1962 war. Thanks very much for being with us. I think one of the key statements mentioned by the External Affairs Minister in the second or third line of his speech is that ties are in the direction of some improvement. To me, when I read this, it seems a very cautious statement, but the word some improvement indicate that he's not necessarily holding his breath for a radical change. We need to be cautious. That's my reading. Is that yours as well?
No, absolutely, Vishnu. I think given developments that we have seen since 2020, I think there is every reason to be cautious in our approach with China. After all, what they attempted in 2020 was in contravention of two agreements that we had signed in 1993 and 1996 to not induct large presence of troops on the line of actual control, the India-China border areas. And from that perspective, I think their attempts at multiple transgressions certainly have been the greatest setback in the relationship, as I said, since 1962 perhaps. And we haven't seen fatalities on the border in the last 45 years. So it was a serious development, and one that I think we will have to come out in a very calibrated manner. I think Dr. Jaishankar also mentioned the word calibrated, that we have to be very cautious in the way that we have to deal with the situation. We've achieved an important milestone, in my view, after protracted negotiations at the military commander level and at the diplomatic level. And as a result of which we've sort of been able to achieve this agreement on disengagement, which is essentially pulling back forces along the friction points and allowing the dust to settle. At the same time, in certain areas, you've had resumption of patrolling, which I think is a great development. And then, of course, you have to go through the next couple of steps, which, again, Dr. Jaishankar referred to in terms of de-escalation, which is basically thinning out troops on the border areas. And finally, I think you get into the phase of, de-induction, which is basically having troops actually removed. I mean, the additional troops that are brought in as a result of the conflict in 2020 would be then completely de-inducted and removed from the area. And I think that is when things would really see a greater normalization. Right now, you're looking obviously at some gradual restoration of normalcy. That's my sense. And you'll probably take certain initial measures in that direction. That's also my sense of the situation, but that's very personal. I feel that they might take a few steps in terms of resumption of flights, for example, a more liberal visa policy. Right now, it's a very, very, I would say, stringent visa policy that we follow in terms of giving visas to Chinese nationals. No tourist visas are being issued, and even business visas are very, very carefully scrutinized before being issued. So some of those areas could ease up. And then we'll have to get into, the other areas involving trade, investments, etc.
Mr. Shringla, you were Foreign Secretary then, and Galwan took place. Could you share something for the first time on what happened then when you as Foreign Secretary came across the news of the biggest crisis in India-China relations in 45 years, if not more?
Well, it certainly gave us some sleepless nights because, we had to be alert day and night because, whether it was, for us, whether we were at late hours, it didn't matter as long as there were activities on the front. And I think I do recall that we had some very, very tense moments. And I think General Naravne, as, then Chief of Army Staff, has both written about it and spoken about it. But clearly, there were some very tense moments at that time, and we were very close to, as Dr. Jaishankar mentions, a much more serious situation of actual conflict. There was heavy weaponry in the area, and a slightest error on either side, or a slightest, I would say, miscalculation either side could have resulted in a sort of I would say, border conflict and skirmish which could have been much larger. I mean, could have expanded into a larger India-China conflict. So I think we were fortunate and the situation was very well managed on the border. And we did not get into a situation which resulted in an escalation of hostilities. It was confined to the area. And I think ultimately a very series of talks at the military and diplomatic levels eased the tensions gradually, leading finally to a disengagement at 6 different points along the, along our western border in Ladakh.
Mr. Shringla, let's talk a little bit about when the Indian armed forces actually stepped in on the south bank of Pangong, in the Rizangla area, just north of that. And near the Spangur So, as it were, where we actually were right on the LAC. Of course, you will never tell me whether we'd actually crossed the LAC or not, but I think we have a rough idea of what took place over there. The point being that India countered the Chinese aggression with aggression of our own. You were Foreign Secretary then. What went into what would have been a very deliberate and calculated and calibrated move?
Well, in diplomacy, leverage is very important. And you have to have leverage on the ground. If you don't have leverage on the ground, your negotiating position becomes weak. And the only way you can actually have a meaningful negotiation is when both sides have something to give and take. And of course, I think there were the entire, actual hostilities began with China trying to assert itself on the North Bank. If you remember, the fingers on the Pangong So Lake is where there was some level of friction. Then it expanded to the Galwan Valley. From our point of view, I think it was important for us to take the heights that were on the South Bank, which you were referring to, Rizangla, that could overlook the entire valley below and give us a strategic position. And I don't think at any stage, the line of actual control is a line which doesn't exist in reality. It is what you perceive to be the line. So you have a sense of the line. The Chinese have a different sense of the line. You don't know where exactly it meets. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think at any stage we exceeded the line that was there, but we came up to that line. And I think that definitely gave us the leverage that was important in the negotiations that ensued, because we also had something to offer in terms of that, give and take that followed. But whatever it is, I think our people and our negotiators at the military and diplomatic levels were very, very firm. We were not willing to relent unless our fullest conditions are met. And I'm happy to say that today, as you talk about disengagement agreement, I think it is very difficult for even those critics of the government to say that we've gone wrong anywhere. I think we've very, very carefully, assiduously fulfilled our requirements in terms of what we expect of that agreement. So disengagement has been very, very specific. It has involved both sides pulling back. It has involved both sides maintaining a certain level of, let's say, restraint in terms of, any adventurism. And finally, I think it has also given us back our patrolling rights in areas that are very important, which is, for example, the Depsang Bulge, where we patrolled a number of points along the line of actual control, and which was denied to us for some time in that friction phase. But today, the fact that our troops can go and actually resume their patrolling, I think is a great step forward.
I just want to go through a few more points mentioned by the External Affairs Minister. Firstly, right up top, he said China illegally occupies territory in Aksai Chin. This is our time-honored position. Again, it just seems to me that India's principles in dealing with China, whether it comes to our position on the Shaksgam Valley, whether it comes to our position on Aksai Chin, whether it comes to our position based on a series of diplomatic agreements from the 80s onwards, that remains, right? Whatever has happened now is good in a sense that it takes us forward, but the premise of India's diplomacy with Beijing is something which has been a time-honored position. Nothing in that has fundamentally changed. Is that right?
No, absolutely. I think, everything can go back. I mean, if you look back, everything really is, predicated on a number of agreements that were signed right from the 1988 agreement, when Rajiv Gandhi visited China. And then you had a number of agreements after that, 91, 93, 96, and so on and so forth. All of these are designed to give some level of confidence in terms of dealing with the boundary issue. But also the fact that both sides have decided to isolate the boundary issue at the level of special, the special representatives on our side, which is the NSA, and their side is the State Council and Foreign Minister. And the idea was that they would look at the entire border issues based on agreements that were concluded in the past. And from our point of view, I think there is absolutely no doubt that the principles on which we have been negotiating will continue to be adhered to. The difference really is that in the past, for the last 4 years or so, we have actually, that entire process has been frozen. The entire process of dealing with the border, on a comprehensive basis, we've been only talking about Western Ladakh. And now perhaps, the special representatives can again resume their talks as I think has been agreed, and they can start looking at the entire border comprehensively. In fact, the model that we've adopted in terms of disengagement in Western Ladakh gives us a sort of a paradigm that could be successfully followed in other parts of the India-China line of actual control.
That's an interesting point. How do you suggest we go about that? In the statement today, for example, there was mention of Longju. That's in Arunachal Pradesh, a couple of other areas as well. These have been areas of differences and sharp, stark differences between India and China. What, in your opinion, could be the way of dealing with these areas where there are sharp differences on the interpretation of the McMahon line in Arunachal Pradesh?
Yeah, there are always differences in interpretation. The issue is how to manage that, position that exists there until a comprehensive solution to the boundary is found. I'm only talking about management of the situation, because both sides are making huge progress in infrastructure development, border-related developments. And as you come closer and closer to areas that are disputed, the line of actual control, as I said, nobody really knows what the line of actual control is. You have your sense of the line, the Chinese have their sense of the line, and clearly it's not the same. So in order to make sure that there's no friction and that does not go into a larger conflict, you have to bring into effect management principles which can vary from sector to sector. But as I said, the Western Ladakh sector gives us an idea of how things can be managed with both sides moving back to more permanent positions and restraining patrolling to the requirements that are necessary and very, very carefully calibrated, so you don't come into contact with each other, and that contact does not really, result in friction or conflict.
And so a final question to you. I mean, and again, since you were Foreign Secretary at the time, and for a period of time after that as well, were there moments when you actually felt that a breakthrough was on the cards? It obviously wasn't until now in terms of disengagement, but there was immediate disengagement and the creation of buffer zones, for example, in Galwan, Gogra, Hot Springs, and of course, North Pangong. Were you as Foreign Secretary ever optimistic in your own mind, thinking that we might actually get somewhere a little bit more? It wasn't to happen till now, but did you ever encounter any such moments?
Well, there was a point of view that, we've got a certain level of resolution, let's move ahead. But I think the other point of view was that let's address this issue comprehensively. Unless all of our demands and all of those, let's say, issues that arose as a result of the events of 2020 were comprehensively addressed as far as we were concerned to our satisfaction, that there could not be a move towards normalcy. I think that argument prevailed, and I'm very happy that it did, because today you can say that you have a comprehensive, let's say, settlement on the way that we can manage the western, border in the western sector in Ladakh. And as a result of that, I think we will probably be able to, we'll be far more comfortable in terms of how the public, appreciates and sees it, let's say, sentiments across political lines. And I think this will give us, the confidence to move forward on the remaining aspects of those negotiations and any further negotiations that would take place after that.
All right. Well, it is a positive step, without any doubt, but it is just that. And perhaps we need to wait and see ultimately if we can get back to the true potential of this relationship. But thank you, Mr. Shringla, very much for speaking to us and going through the Foreign Minister's statement in Parliament.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Vishnu.